So let me give you a little overview quickly of what we have planned. I'm going to do the first section, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, as we used to say in Canada. And then we'll take a 5-minute break, primarily for me to change into my travel clothes. And I'll do the second section, ready to walk out the door to the airport. And we'll give out a few books and a few DVDs at the break, and try to save a little time for questions at the end. And if I have to leave, then Catherine can take over. All right, let's go. This presentation, this is what it is not. I'm not talking about theology. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about brain function. So just be really clear about that, because sometimes we make assumptions. So I'm talking just about brain function this afternoon. This is an illustration that I created called the Who I Am Pyramid. And it is designed to illustrate the 5 key things I think it's really important every human being knows about his or her own brain. There are 5 levels, and the bottom one, the first foundational one, is that whatever else we are as human beings, we are either male or female, with a very small band that we used to call a 50-50 brain, and we have new terminology for that, and I'll explain that, that are almost equally empathizing and systemizing. Still assumably male or female, because they can have an XX chromosome or an XY chromosome. But this is the foundation. This is who we are first. And then there are other descriptive pieces of brain function that help you understand how you approach life. And it's really important, I think we need to know that about each other. As I mentioned this morning, whatever else human beings are, there's consensus among researchers, which is rare, that we are relational, spiritual, and sexual. And my brain's opinion is that your brain is your number 1 sex organ, because everything starts in your brain. It impacts everything you do your entire life. We talk about all kinds of things in schools and churches and organizations, but we rarely talk about sexuality. We talk about spirituality, we talk about relationships, but we don't talk about the core of who we are as sexual beings. So that's what we're doing this afternoon. And people often come up to me and say, "Aren't you embarrassed to stand up in front and say the word sexuality?" And I go, "Of course not. What's there to be embarrassed about? It's who we are." You can pretend. You know, growing up in the late 1800s, us kids didn't know much about where our brothers and sisters came from. There was the stork. Do you remember the stork? Some of you remember the stork. Never made any sense to us, but the stork brought my little brother. A fast review from biology. I'm sure you remember this. The human genome, although we didn't even have that word when I was taking nursing at Loma Linda University. So your human genome is really your genetic information that's encoded on your chromosomes, 46 of them at least. That's what we've always been taught there were, 46 chromosomes, 22 pairs. You get 1 each from your mother and father, and then you have the sex chromosomes, 2 X's or an X and a Y. Plus, now we know that there's something else called epigenetics, and that is the environment in which you were nurtured, starting with gestation and the rest of your life, along with your microbiome, all the bacteria in your body, and your virome, all the viruses in your body, that can actually turn these genes on or off. And that has revolutionized how we're looking at genetic inheritance. 99% of all your DNA is in your chromosomes. 1% is in your maternal mitochondria. Do you know what the mitochondria are? Anybody know? The powerhouse. Your mitochondria are those little tiny energy factories in every cell that has a nucleus in your body. And that's what gives you energy. I had a wonderful lunch. Those little factories are turning what I ate into energy so I can stand up here and share this information with you. And 1% of your DNA is found in those little energy factories. The interesting thing about that is that when cells multiply and divide and multiply, sometimes they don't do it exactly correctly. And we get mutations and variations in cells. This 1% of the DNA is much more likely to mutate and hang on to those mutations a very long time. So long that now you can take a swab and rub it on the inside of your facial cheek and send it off somewhere, and they'll look at the mutations in your DNA. And then they'll look at all their banks of DNA, and they'll trace that mutation back until it stops. And that's where your line started, because those mutations are carried forward. I got my DNA analyzed the other day and posted my data on the computer. And I've got already about half a dozen emails from people around the world who say, you know, I think I'm your second cousin, because we've got matching pieces of DNA. So far, I haven't invited anybody to my house, but it's really interesting to dialogue with them. And sometimes, just in a few emails, we can find out that we had the same great-grandmother or something like that, just through the line of the DNA. So if you remember this from biology, there's the 22 pairs, and here's the X and the Y. Lecturing at a university the other day, and a young man said to me, looks like this Y is broken off. There must be a mistake there because it can't be that little. And I said, well, it is that little. And it's not broken off. And the sperm is the smallest human cell that's ever been identified. He did not like that very well. But that's what it is. So a long time ago, half a century, people started talking about the gender-brain continuum with what we knew. And here is what we started with. At one end was the empathizing brain. That's equated with female brains. And on the other end is the systemizing brain, equated with male brains. And this was an XX pattern, and this was an XY pattern. And you know, when somebody got pregnant, if everything went well, you'd get this or this. Or sometimes twins, this and this. And for most of the last 50 years, that was the continuum. And then we found that there was a group of people who, you know, everybody gets 2 scores when you are trying to figure out who they are. And we found that there were some people who had almost equal scores. You know, the quintessential female brain would be a 9-1. She'd still have some systemizing in her brain because we have all the same hormones and we have all the same characteristics. It's a difference in the amount. I mean, even a quintessential feminine female who lives in pink can still put her underwear on before her outer clothes. I mean, that's a systemizing thing. So we're all parts of everything, just in different amounts. And Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen, who's done a lot of this research, said, wait a minute, you know, about 5% of people we can't even put on there. Isn't that interesting? I wonder who the other 5% are. And I tell people when I move to this model, avoid asking me anything about that middle band because I can't tell you very much. We just know that they're more half and half than 1-9 or 2-8 or 3-7. And occasionally somebody would come up to me and say, I want to know more about that because I'm sure I'm partnered with one. And I didn't know what they thought it meant. So then we used that for about, I'd say, 8 to 10 years. And then we very, very, very recently, and you're the first church that's ever heard this. The only other people that have ever heard it is earlier this week. I was up at Leone Meadows in the Northern California Conference Retreat Center, and I was teaching this to the ministers. Tel Aviv University, now they're doing brain scans. And what they're finding is that while some features are more common in one gender than the other, each person's brain has a unique mosaic of these features, as well as others that are seen commonly in both. And basically what that says is we are all parts of the same, just in different levels. You know, males and females both have testosterone. But my goodness, raising my 3 sons, by the time they hit puberty, you could figure they had 20, 30 times more testosterone than I did. And if they were playing in competitive sports, well, you could just double that. Because competitive sports just increase testosterone in the male brain, and not so much in the female brain. So I would never let them go out on a date, 1-to-1, after a competitive game. Because testosterone increases assertiveness and probably also aggression. So Daphne Joel said, what we show is that there are multiple ways to be male and female. There is not one way, and most of these ways are completely overlapping. And there is no continuum anymore, no linear continuum. And so everything we've been teaching as far as that linear continuum had to go out the window because it doesn't work anymore. So I got really busy and I have figured out at least one new way to portray this. Couple caveats. Human brains are more alike than they are different. There appears to be no gestational default position, as was once believed. We used to say, when a woman gets pregnant, if there is no Y chromosome, if there is no chemical bath to the brain, the default position is an empathizing brain. Okay, there's no default position. They're really clear. Something different happens to get the empathizing from the systemizing brain. A person's gender cannot be determined with any certainty by just looking at the brain. There, you could have some clues, but you cannot be certain just by looking. Some individuals have congruent, everything matches, chromosomes, internal sex organs, external genitalia, personal brain perception of who they are, but more are gender non-conforming than previously thought. Meaning the old thing of XXXY and you are either empathizing or systemizing has fallen as brain scan and other types of research increases. So far, any human being who has a Y chromosome is a male, period. So that speaks to that foundational piece on the pyramid, that we are basically some form of X without a Y and some form of Y, usually with an X. So here's my attempt to show what we currently know as of 10 days ago. Here we have the XX 46 chromosomes total, 2 of them being XX, that we've always said was an empathizing brain. And here we have the 46 chromosomes, X and Y, that we always said was a systemizing brain. And here we've got this grouping right here, which can be either XX or XY, but are almost equal in the characteristics. And on this side, where there are no Ys, we've got an XX, but there's male characteristics. We've got the X0, just one X, so that you've only got 45 chromosomes. We've got 47, 48, and 49, so there's some variation right there. But look at the variation on the side where there is a Y. Apparently, the Y calls for a different kind of chemical bath to the brain than is seen in just the XX pattern. And so we've got 47 chromosomes. They can be XXY or they can be XYY. We've got 48, XXXY, XXYY, or XYYY. And we got 49, but there's 3 patterns of those as well. XXXYY, XXXXY, and XYYYY. Who knew? No idea. Now, the first question I got at the ministerial retreat was, okay, which of those patterns represents brains that are homosexual? I was surprised they asked the question. But they asked the question, and my answer was all of them or none of them. We don't know. There seems to be absolutely no correlation whatsoever with sexual orientation and sexual preference in terms of genes and chromosomes. We are first people, and this is all about people, all about XX complements and XY complements and any numbers of variations. And the other day I had a researcher call me and say, you know, have you already got your new chromosome pattern thing done? And I said, well, yeah, but it's probably a work in progress because we're going to find, I'm sure we'll find other variations. And he said, well, I think we've already found XXXXXY, 5 X's and a Y. And depending on the variation, it's going to have a brain that's slightly different. Now look at these two. What does that mean? There is one particular gene, the SRY gene, and you know that the genes line up like a language on the chromosomes. They're really a language. DNA is a language. Got 64 letters in the DNA alphabet. Not 26, 64. And who we are is spelled out in those letters, if you will. Sometime when I'm proofing my work, I found that I misspelled a word, and I have to correct the spelling. Well, as researchers are analyzing DNA, they find that sometimes the DNA letters are misspelled. And one gene out of order, misspelled, is all it takes to trigger certain types of conditions. Sickle cell anemia, for example. Of the probably 30,000 genes, you know, when I was at school in nursing, the projection was we'd have 250,000 genes. Looks like we've only got somewhere between 20 and 30,000, but it only takes one to create sickle cell anemia. And it's fascinating to me that one little teeny letter in the 64-letter alphabet, out of order, can change something like that in a person's body. So the SRY gene that triggers the development of testicles is damaged. And so what you'll get is something that looks like a female but has a damaged Y. Or you'll have an XY complement, but for some reason the Y is copied into the X. And so that will be it'll look like an XX complement when you do the study, but the Y gene is stuck in there, the Y chromosome, and the person looks male, but they don't have the typical configuration. Now, remember back to the XXY and the XXYY. The XXY, 47 chromosomes, is estimated to occur at 1 in each 1,000 live male births. So you get 1,000 men together, and probably one of them is this XXY. And the XXYY, which is 48 chromosomes, 2 more than we used to think was, all there were, occurs in 1 in 18,000 to 40,000 live male births. That's a huge range because they're just starting to do testing for that. Now, the middle band that used to be called 50-50 brains. Do you remember the term hermaphrodite? We used to talk about the hermaphrodite, which was a person that you weren't really sure which was which because things didn't look exactly the way we had been brought up to believe they would look. 2% of live births worldwide are intersex. It's only 120 million because we got 6 billion plus people. But 120 million is the size of, it's bigger than a lot of cities in this whole country. And by the way, I've already put these on my website, so feel free to go there and you can read them all. So what happens in this intersex band? Well, what happens is the person is really a 50-50 person. They have both ovarian and testicular tissue. And it can come in the same gonad, as we call it. They call it an ovotestis. Or you can have one ovary and one testicle. And externally, they can look male or female. So I was lecturing to the ministers, and to say that this was news is probably putting it mildly. And one of the individuals put up a hand and said, well, how am I going to know if I've got any intersex people in my congregation? I said, well, you aren't. What are you going to do? You're going to stand at the back, Todd, and as you shake hands with people, say, you look like you're a female, but just for clarification, do you have 2 ovaries? It's none of your business. The only time you would be concerned is if you want to marry that person and you want to have children, and so you might ask them if they've got the typical equipment. But my goodness, we get hung up on minors. We're all people. You can have a mismatch between a body that looks male and a brain that person is sure is a female brain and doesn't belong in this body. Or you can have what looks like a female body. Remember the damaged Y and the Y copied into the X? But they've got a brain that they are sure belongs to a male brain. And all I can say is that must be slightly confusing. And sometimes if the discomfort is bad enough, they'll actually go through the process of a sex change operation because they're trying to get their body to match the brain as they perceive they have it. And I think that sometimes in our culture we haven't been very kind to people who believe that their brain doesn't match their body, and we're pretty clear that that exists. There are other types of variations that are based on hormones. So there's the androgenital syndrome, where you have a female that's an XX, but there's huge amounts of androgen, testosterone hormones in the mother's body. And that little female is born looking like a little boy. Or You can have androgen insensitivity syndrome, where chromosomally you've got a little boy that's XY, but that fetus, for whatever reason, is almost the closest thing I can compare it to is it's allergic to those masculinizing hormones. And the hormones, therefore, don't do to the body what they would ordinarily do. So that little boy is born looking like a female, but he actually has an XY chromosome complement. So the variations are myriad and amazing. There are other mismatches. And this is where we often get into problems in entire societies, certainly in families and churches, where the mismatch for what was expected, and this is what's been expected for eons, XX female, brain and body match. XY male, brain and body match. Absolutely, clearly sexual preference for the opposite gender. Well, that's not reality. So I've been several places with Catherine. It was wonderful to go to Holland and talk to the ministers and the teachers there, and they haven't even heard this. We only told them what we knew last year when I was there. So sometime perhaps we can do another section and go into some of that more deeply, but there's lots of information on my website. So my website is arlenetaylor.org. And you can go to brain references, and you can look up sexuality, and you can look up sexual preference and sexual orientation, and you'll see the bits of information that I know about, and look that up, and I've got to get busy and get this stuff loaded. Another place you can go, and I was born in Canada, just thought I'd put that in. This is the Ontario Consultants on Religious Tolerance. You can get this off my website because this slide is there. And if you want to know about some of the other brain differences, they've got at least 14 studies. And they're fascinating studies, and you can read about them. For example, the inner ear of a woman who believes she is a lesbian is identical to the inner ear of a male who is straight. So now we're getting we're seeing different kinds of things in different brains based on what that person's brain is telling them. So it's pretty fascinating, and you're welcome to look that up. Now, since we are all male or female, the issue perhaps is less about your chromosomal complement and everything else, and more about we are sexual beings, and how are you acting that out in your life? So I thought I'd quickly bring you some of the new research about the differences in the types of hormones that are triggered in the brain and body based on your choices in terms of sexual behaviors. The problem is, as I mentioned this morning, that the brain takes a long time to mature. Corpus callosum, not done till 2021. Prefrontal cortex, where you make those really fine discriminations, morality, choices, that's not done till mid to the late 20s. You know, as a preacher's kid, I probably was a little judgmental growing up because that was the environment in which I found myself. And I remember being quite young and learning that Christ began his earthly ministry at the age of what? 30. You know what I said? How come he waited so long? Man, if he'd gotten started a lot earlier, he could have gotten a lot more done. Well, if the prefrontal cortex is really not clearly finished until very late 20s, he needed that finished before he could deal with all of the problems that he had to deal with. So I take another look at Scripture based on what we're learning now. And people who partner before their brain is done are at risk for partnering unwisely because they don't have their full brain complement yet to help them make those decisions. But we live in a Hollywood-generated world. Okay. My brain's opinion is that families, churches, organizations have been remiss in not teaching our young people stuff they need to know in order to make good choices. The bottom line is this: when people say, "Oh, but I love this person, and we've just got great chemistry," they do, but that's all they've got is chemistry. And now they need to take a look and see if this attraction is something on which they want to build. So let's go through that quickly. Your brain's the most amazing organ, not on the planet, but in the known universe. One scientist put it this way: it works 24 hours a day, 365 days a year from birth until you fall in love. And then it gets hijacked by something called phenylethylamine, or PEA, and it turns you into a pea brain. A sense of falling in love or being in love is fueled by a tsunami, and I mean a tsunami, of neurochemicals that have come to be known as the love chemicals. 3 of them: PEA, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Somebody said to me the other day, but this tsunami gets us into all kinds of trouble, so how come that happens? And I'm going, I should know. I didn't do the design. But this is my brain's opinion. If you didn't have some of that, I think there are many people who'd never get married. Because I'm telling you, it is the most challenging thing you will ever do in your entire life. Probably the most rewarding, can be, but the most challenging, followed by children. So who would get married and have children if you didn't have some of this chemical tsunami driving you? PEA, naturally occurring amphetamine-like stimulant. It's really an amphetamine. It's in the brain. It's also in dark chocolate and avocado. So you need a shot of PEA? Have a little avocado. Have a little dark chocolate. I eat avocado almost every morning. So PEA is responsible for that head over heels, funny feeling in the pit of your stomach that we call euphemistically falling in love. It is just chemical attraction. That's not bad, but that's what it is, chemical attraction. It lasts a maximum of 48 months. Usually it's closer to 18 months. Might be a little bit longer if you live on opposite coasts and you spend the time just, when am I going to get to see them again? Might last a little longer, but we're talking 18 to 48 months. This powerful amphetamine triggers the release of norepinephrine and dopamine. What's norepinephrine? Norepinephrine is a very, very powerful chemical that is both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. Do you know what that means? Up and down means yes. Okay. A neurotransmitter is a chemical that allows the neurons to talk to each other. So when you have a substance that's a neurotransmitter, it will affect every neuron in your body. And that's those in your brain, those in your spinal central nervous system, those in your gut. You probably have more neurons in your gastrointestinal tract than you've got in your entire brainstem and spinal cord, and your heart, and your solar plexus, and a few other places. So it handles everything to do with neurons. A hormone is a substance that a minuscule, teeny fraction of a drop, like testosterone, is extremely powerful, and it will hit every other cell in your body. So something that is both impacts every cell in your brain and body. It's that powerful. So norepinephrine works with the autonomic nervous system, the subconscious part. It regulates sexual arousal. Hello? Now you get this attraction, PEA pops up, which in itself is powerful as an amphetamine, and then it triggers noradrenaline or norepinephrine, and now the person that you're attracted to, you really are interested in them sexually. But it's just chemical attraction. You feel it. Sweaty palms, pounding heart, can't wait to see them again, aren't hungry, you know. Some of you have been there. And dopamine, which is the feel better chemical, it doesn't necessarily make you feel good, it just makes you feel better than you feel right now. It's released in the brain stem when you think about feeling better or do something that triggers your brain reward system. So you think about this person, most wonderful person in the world. Out pours the dopamine. Half of all the dopamine that your brain stem releases goes straight to your gastrointestinal system. So that's how come you get the GI symptoms. You know, you can hardly wait to see them again, and you either get cramps and diarrhea or constipation or maybe some of both. And you're so in love. Yeah, well, come on. It's the chemical that's making you do that. Emory University, really interesting study. They took a female vole. I had to look up and find out what a vole was. I thought it was a spelling error, but it does happen to be a type of rodent. So they took a vole, and I get the feeling that there were a whole bunch of male voles around her, but not right in her cage. They could just get around the edge. Now they injected her with some dopamine. And then much later, they actually put her in the group of the males, and unerringly and every time, she went straight to the vole that was present when they injected her with the dopamine. You got that? So women, you have sexual activity with a male. You will release dopamine. You will bond to him, and he might be a terrible potential partner for you. But you'll choose him because of the dopamine. Which is really, really important that you avoid having sexual activity with other males. You know, the biblical model is until you were engaged, you know, you did nothing sexually. So somebody said to me the other day, well, does that mean if I get engaged that I can go to bed with them? I thought the brain's not done yet. Now, so that's the cascade. Now, it's really easy to get addicted to phenylethylamine because it's so powerful. The more sexual partners you have, because you build cellular memory every time you have sex with another individual, the more difficulty you're going to have remaining monogamous if you choose the monogamous route to partner, marry, stay monogamous. So we have, and society does us a terrible dysfunction. We tell young males, go sow your wild oats and get that out of your system and then settle down and be a good husband and father. Oh yeah, right. Those individuals are at high risk for either having an actual affair, because as PEA drops off, let's say you date for 2 years, get married, you know, and you have a wonderful honeymoon and you actually know how to use your sexual equipment appropriately. I tell people, just because you have the equipment doesn't mean you know how to use it. And many young couples start a disastrous marriage on their honeymoon because they have no idea what to do. And PEA falls off, and then they look at each other and go, where's that really exciting hit we used to have? Because it's gone. Well, I must have married the wrong person. Well, you may have, but you may not have. And it simply may mean that as PEA falls off, you start following that amphetamine. And to do that, you will have to get involved somehow with some other type of sexual activity. You'll either have an emotional affair with somebody, or you'll have an actual sexual affair with somebody, or you'll get involved with masturbation, or you'll get involved with pornography. Once you decide to partner and be monogamous for the rest of your life with that individual, you know, in our country we don't do monogamy. You realize that we don't do monogamy. Couples meet each other, they become sexually involved, maybe they date 2-3 years, maybe they live together for 5 years and they break up. They were monogamous during that period of time. Now they meet somebody else and now they're sexually active with them. And we have serial monogamy in this country. And that's not monogamy. So, once you decide to be genuinely committed, you have to understand that PEA is going to fall off. It happens every time. And if you understand that, and you know, you go away for a weekend and you have a really, you know, you sort of remember what the tsunami was like. Wasn't really quite like that, but you remember. It's a little, you know, memory refresher. But it's never going to be like it was before. And that's the problem with our Hollywood role modeling, because we see people, they meet on a movie and they get divorced from their partners and get together, and usually they break up. Doesn't last. Any relationship that makes it past the 48 months, that relationship is assisted by 3 other neurochemicals that are designed to help the couple bond and stay together for eternity, if you will. 3 different chemicals. Oxytocin. Oxytocin plays lots of roles in pair bonding. Somebody said to me the other day, well, can I take some oxytocin? Well, you could, but it's destroyed in the GI tract, so it's not going to get across the blood-brain barrier, so no point. What does it do? It evokes a sense of contentment, reduction in anxiety and stress, promotes feelings of calmness and security when in the company of the mate, and, read my lips, allows orgasm to occur. So if a couple does not know how to use their sexual equipment and have a really good relationship and pour out oxytocin, one of them is probably not going to have an orgasm. Somebody was asked me the other day, what's an orgasm? I nearly fainted. I went and looked in the church manual. It's not in there. Which is probably too bad because they're not getting the information. But orgasm is one of those God-given gifts to a couple who want to stay committed and in love the rest of their lives, to pour out the oxytocin and allow them to have this wonderful, you know, few seconds. It doesn't last long. I had a minister come to me and say, whatever you do, don't use the word orgasm in the lecture today, because I have my 13-year-old here and he'll ask me what it is. And I said, if someone hasn't told him already, I'd be very surprised, and you probably aren't happy about what he got told. So I said, that's why I think we've done these kids a disservice. My mother says to me, well, what shall I tell my 10-year-old? He asked me what an organs was. And I said to him, an organs? Do you mean a pipe organ? No. No, he says, it has something to do with sex. And she said, I knew he meant orgasm, but I said, I don't know. Tell him. It's something that parents feel when they have an especially good day. Okay, you don't have to get graphic. Serotonin. The second one that's put out in permanent pair bonding. It's a neurotransmitter, but 90% of it is in the gut. It impacts mood. It contributes to feelings of well-being and happiness. It increases with mild to moderate physical exercise. And levels innately appear to be lower in females. So men, take your wife by the hand and go for a good walk. Her serotonin is likely to increase, and she just might be very interested in doing another little bit of exercise later on. And the last one's endorphins. Remember, chemical tsunami is done 18 to 24 months, and what really happens is the brain develops tolerance to those three love chemicals: PEA, norepinephrine, dopamine. But as the brain develops tolerance, it starts to release endorphins. Another, PEA is an amphetamine. Well, endorphins are opiates. I mean, talk about drug addiction. You can get addicted to any substance in your own body, especially opiates. People over-exercise because they're addicted to the endorphins. It calms anxiety, reduces stress, relieves pain, increases attachment, and a sense of comfort. Endorphins are released during exercise, committed love, sexual activity. And so one of the researchers say couples who exercise and laugh together stay together because they get the endorphins up. So here's the bottom line, which we have not talked about, unfortunately, and we need to start talking about it. Read this with me aloud. Sexual romantic attraction to another person. Do it again. Read it like you mean it, because I want to put it in long-term memory. Sexual romantic attraction to another person may begin chemically. Recognize it for what it is and use your brain to determine if pursuing this attraction would be ethical, moral, healthy, wise, lead to positive outcomes, a good choice to be the parent of your child, or to risky outcomes. You may not be responsible for every attraction. You are responsible for whether or not you pursue it and the sexual behaviors you choose to exhibit, which requires thinking ahead, ethical moral standards, and personal, clear boundaries. And I believe if we were teaching this to our young people, we could help at least some of them avoid some disastrous liaisons. I forgot to tell you to feel free to get up, move around, and walk anytime you want to, because 50% of brains learn best when they're standing and moving. So remember that. Now, I'd like to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to go change my clothes, not so that you can see me in something different, but so that I can leave right away for the airport. And we'll start again in 5 minutes. And feel free to go ahead and get the next set up on the screen. All right, get up and move.